The United Leukodystrophy Foundation presents Female Carriers Support. Our presenters today are Taylor Kane and Joanne Losey. Wonderful. All right. Welcome, Taylor and Joanne. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hello to everybody that's watching on the YouTube side. Feel free to be entering in your questions at any time. Any comments, questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any time. I'll be monitoring them and passing them along to our presenters as we go. So first, I would like to start, and we'll have Taylor start first. She'll introduce herself, and then she can pass it to Joanne, and Joanne can give some background on herself. And then I have a couple of questions to start, and then I'll start monitoring the questions in the YouTube chat. So go ahead, Taylor.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Keely. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Kane. I am a 21-year-old carrier of adrenal leukodystrophy, or ALD. I found out, or my ALD story started in 2001 when I was 3 years old. My dad was diagnosed with cerebral adrenal leukodystrophy, and at the same time, we found out that this meant that I was a carrier of the disease. Since it is an X-linked disease, that means that men with the disease will automatically pass the gene down to their daughters. At the time, there wasn't much known about being a carrier of ALD. It was assumed back then that carriers were completely asymptomatic. So my family was basically told that, I had a 50% chance of passing the disease down when I had kids one day. But other than that, I didn't really have to worry. So over the course of the next 2 years, my dad's illness got progressively worse, and he passed away when I was 5 years old, when I was in kindergarten. So over the years, I stayed involved with the ALD community. Before my dad had passed away, him and my mom actually started a nonprofit organization called Run for ALD, which is where I met some other advocates and some other families. And I believe one of my first ever speaking engagements was at the ULF conference when I was in my mid-teenage years, maybe 14 or 15. I talked about fundraising. So I have been involved with ULF and other organizations pretty much since middle school, since I started wanting to take a bigger role in advocacy and get more involved. So I've known that I was a carrier for as long as I can remember. My mom was always really open about it with me. And basically every few years she would re-explain what it meant for me. And when I was 13, she took me to the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, where I met with one of my dad's former doctors and a genetic counselor who explained the risks associated with being a carrier. It was also around this time where it was becoming more common knowledge that carriers of ALD could develop symptoms of the disease. However, there was still not a lot of information known about that. It was assumed that it was pretty rare for carriers to get symptoms. So it didn't really cross my mind all that much. I didn't think that I had too much to worry about. However, as I got older and started getting more involved in carrier advocacy, specifically for young carriers of ALD, I started finding out that a lot of carriers actually do eventually develop symptoms of the disease. And I thought it was just so unfortunate that there was so little research and understanding of these symptoms. And then on top of that, I knew that I was going to have to make difficult decisions regarding reproduction. I knew that, my carrier status could impact my relationships, my family planning, and then also just the psychosocial side of things, worrying about the future and not really knowing what to expect. So I definitely turned to social media, created groups of my own on Facebook, joined other carrier groups. And then as I started getting more involved in the broader rare disease community, I found out that there was a lot of other X-linked diseases, such as PMD is one of them, or Duchenne muscular dystrophy, hemophilia A and B. I found out there was these other X-linked diseases where women were often considered to be just carriers, but many of them experienced symptoms of the disease, but still faced, a lack of research, a lack of treatment options, a lack of inclusion in clinical trials, had to deal with those difficult reproductive decisions. And so then in 2017, I decided to found my nonprofit organization, Remember the Girls. which is dedicated to all carriers and females with X-linked diseases. So we advocate for greater understanding of our physical and emotional symptoms, more access to reproductive options, more information, and just kind of breaking down the stigma behind what it means to be a carrier. So yeah, that's what I do now. I graduated from college in December, so now I'm just running my nonprofit and, seeing where things go from there career-wise, looking at my different options. But I'm really glad to be here today and answer any questions anyone has about carrier status, especially for young women or teens, since I had lived through that myself. But yeah, thanks. Passing to Joanne.
Thank you very much, Taylor. My name is Joanne Losey, and I am a very symptomatic carrier of ALD. I say very symptomatic because it has been determined that only about 25% of all of the carriers become very symptomatic. And what I mean by that is I went from my diagnosis, where I started using a cane for stability. I moved on then to forearm crutches, occasionally a wheelchair to get around, particularly for long distances, because why go someplace to an event and get there and be too exhausted to be able to participate in it. So let's see, I was diagnosed when I was about 46, and I'm 61 now. And at this time, I am in a wheelchair 24/7, which is not that big a deal, actually. It took a little bit of getting used to, but when you have things to do and you have plans that no matter what happens, you want to continue with, you make a way for it. I was able to get, about 15 years ago, a conversion van. I had been given a power wheelchair before that, so I've been getting around pretty well with that. And I was at a dinner meeting one night and mentioned that, oh, hey, I've got a conversion vehicle, so now I can get out and about, and isn't it wonderful? And I got to find a place to volunteer at. I unfortunately did have to retire from my job back in 2006. So I had been kind of biding my time until I was able to really figure out what was going on and where I was headed with it. So I am at this time the executive director at the local emergency food pantry, which fills a huge, huge hole that was building before I was able to do that. But that's just, a little bit of what has been happening with me, just dealing with the progression day by day and getting a lot of support from family. They've been tremendous, and it's all a learning process. You find out what's going on and you learn how to deal with it. And I am not ALD. I am not AMN. I am JoAnn, and I have a lot of things I want to get done with my life for a lot of other people. And so here I am. Please ask questions. And I don't know that much as far as birth control and all that. I'm going to leave that to Taylor because I am well beyond that time. But, it's once I was tested, I have 5 siblings, 2 of them tested and they were negative. I have no family history of this, so it was a big surprise for us. And my daughter has been tested and she is not a carrier, thank God. My son has not been tested yet, but he's in his 40s, so that's up to him.
Great.
Other than that, ULF came into play shortly after I was diagnosed because I needed information. There was nothing on the internet, as Taylor had mentioned. So I needed to know where I was going and what I was going to be doing. I had been referred down to KKI for diagnosis and follow-up. And even though I had been diagnosed locally at the University of Rochester, New York, we went through the testing again just to be absolutely sure of what was going on. So ULF has been fabulous, not only just getting in there and meeting the people and really forming relationships with them, the staff, wow. Just give them a call if you've got a question, if you need a referral to a doctor, if you need to find any kind of equipment. ULF is the first place to start. They will do whatever they can for you. And I have to thank Keely and that whole staff for all the work that they do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanne. And just to keep the conversation moving along a little bit, since you guys both did bring it up as well, I would like just to start some of the questions. With the first one being just, do you have any advice? And, this goes to Taylor, because as Joanne said, do you have any advice in terms of family planning when you know you're a carrier? And, mostly for the young women that are facing this, and even getting into a little bit of how do you approach discussing this topic with any potential love interest that you might have, and even to that extent, some of your family and friends that feel like they might have opinions too.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've known that I was a carrier for as long as I can remember, and I've also known for as long as I can remember that there were options out there if I wanted to pursue, having a child and making sure that they didn't have the disease. So I always knew that these alternative reproductive options like IVF with PGD existed. Really more in the recent years have I begun doing, more research, especially as the leader of an organization, getting asked questions like these a lot. I would say that my advice is definitely to look at all your options out there. IVF with PGD isn't the only one. There's also, other testing methods like amniocentesis, for example. So I would definitely recommend speaking to a genetic counselor, but also doing research on your own. Something that we're doing in my organization, Remember the Girls, is we're developing a family planning toolkit, which is going to have information on all the different options for X-linked carriers, and also include information about insurance coverage, about costs, and trying to navigate that. I think one of the biggest barriers to access for these options is definitely cost. Like I know with IVF, that can be over $20,000, and obviously that's just not accessible to a lot of people who want to start a family. As far as relationships go, I personally have always just been very open about my carrier status. I never really feel like I had to reveal the information so much, just because, people that I was dating could go on my social media and see articles that I had written about my carrier status. And I just post a lot about my advocacy in general. However, I think, having that conversation is definitely difficult, especially as a young woman, being in college, even, for example, like it definitely is a question of like, when do you bring it up? Like if you bring it up, after a few dates, just like, oh, you should know this, is that person going to assume that you think that they're going to be the father of your children? Like, it's just a weird thing to navigate, not knowing when to tell someone or how to tell them. And there definitely is a lot of understanding around being a carrier as well. I know even some of my friends have trouble understanding like why I would do IVF, and they think that I have infertility problems. And I've explained to them that that's just a part of the puzzle for me, the IVF and then the PGT and the genetic testing component. But there definitely is a major lack of understanding. But at the end of the day, I think that regardless of what path that you choose to take, it's definitely something that you feel like is right for your family. There's no one option that's better than another. or even going the natural route. Like, it's something that's just completely up to you and your decision. And I definitely think there is judgment that people can face regardless of what option they choose, which is unfortunate. And I think especially as women, I think there just is a lot of judgment just around, family matters. And that's something that unfortunately we do have to deal with. But just knowing that, doing your research and talking to counselors and doctors and understanding the financial side of things, and then being able to make a holistic decision with your partner or with other members of your family is the most important part. So at the end of the day, it's really up to you. But I definitely do take a lot of comfort in knowing that if I do have kids one day, I'll likely do IVF with PGD. And so it's good to know that that option exists. It definitely makes me feel a lot more hopeful for the future, knowing that, that route is there for me, if needed. Still very far in the future, but.
Yes. Well, but at the same time, you're doing a wonderful job in terms of, just being aware of your options and being so willing to talk about it. And I would just like to plug another foundation. Taylor does have Remember the Girls that focuses on X-linked diseases, but there is another foundation out there for anyone listening that might be interested called Our Odyssey. That Taylor is involved with as well. And you can reach out to the ULF if you would like more information on Our Odyssey, but just a little brief snippet of what they're about is providing information and helping young adults that have genetic diseases, terminal genetic diseases, serious genetic diseases, and how to navigate life with those diseases as you're making family planning decisions, life decisions on where to go to college and things like that. So it's a really great resource for the younger carriers out there. And I am seeing the comments coming in that it might be JoAnn's time to shine. We've got Joyce Mack says, "Hello, JoAnn. I have AMN. I'm 64 years old, and she is in a wheelchair too." Linda says, "How did your back and legs start with non-ability to walk, pain, or stiffness?" And then I'll just give you a couple of these and you can kind of take it from however you would like. And then Jeannie says her mom is 87 and she has no bladder control, uses a cane, stiffness of joints, etc. Do you have any other issues? So if you kind of want to start from there and if you want to talk about how your symptoms started, JoAnn, and kind of address, how they started, how they might have progressed.
Okay. The first thing that started happening with me is I'd be walking down the hall at work and somebody would call out to me from an office and I'd go to turn around and respond to them. And 1 second I was standing and the next moment I was on the floor. Just really started losing balance with almost no movement at all. I didn't have pain. I learned a very specific type of movement after this started happening called anastomotic movement because it helped me to rebalance my body and stay as active as I could possibly be. And it still comes in handy now sometimes, just moving the body correctly so that I can know what's going on and what's not, what area is bothered and what area is not. But I went from there to the cane, which was giving me a lot of help. Once I got down to KKI about, maybe a year after I was diagnosed, the physical therapist there suggested that I might want to consider using the forearm crutches, which made a huge difference with the way I was moving. And of course, it changed the way I was getting around quite a bit. And you just have to make adjustments as you get along. We had built a new home. Let me see, it's almost 8 years ago now. And we built it with all entrances having wheelchair accessibility, wider hallways, wider doorways, just looking forward to possibilities that might happen in the future. Unfortunately, I had fallen and broken one of my feet, many bones in one foot, and because I was trying to get around and doing too much in order to get settled into the house. So, you know, it's being stubborn and getting around. I had surgery on my foot, and the doctor said, you're not going to just be walking around with a boot on. You're going to be in a wheelchair for about 6 months. Unfortunately, I've never actually gotten out of the wheelchair. I have been able to walk a little bit with assistance, but that's I seem to be losing on that aspect of life. I am able to walk occasionally. I can stand and cook a little bit, but for the most part, I'm in the wheelchair. And of course, when I'm out in public, when I'm at work, I am also in a wheelchair. It's just much easier, and nobody's but nobody's getting really bothered by it. When people do see me stand up, they get very excited, and they can't figure out, why aren't you doing more of that? And it's like, well, the only problem is that, go to set a foot in front of me and then follow it up with the other one. That's not going to happen. And that's a realization I came to a few years back. And, I just support myself in other ways. And God knows I get around this house and wherever else I need to be pretty darn well. So my progression has been sometimes day by day, sometimes no progression at all for months at a time. I have no pain in my legs. Occasionally I have it in my back, lower back especially through the hip. But I have no pain in my legs, no neuropathy. And I know a lot of people would be saying, wow, that's great. But there's also the other end of that. And the feeling is very much lowered. So things can happen. Just for example, I dropped a cup of coffee on my lap one day and I had no idea that I had spilled it at all. So, that's the other end of it. That can be a bad deal. So, you just live and figure out ways to make it best for you. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to keep scanning the comments and pulling out some of the questions. And kind of an extension of your answer that you just gave, Joanne, but what are some simple things that someone could do to reduce pain? And I mean, I guess you just said you really don't have much pain, but either of you are either of you aware of any tips on what might be to reduce pain, or would talking to her doctor be probably the best route of action?
Well, I myself would suggest that you start gathering your team of doctors and physical therapists and occupational therapists, because they're really going to help. They're not only going to help with pain, but they're going to be able to help with being able to get around and staying on your feet as much as you can. And, there are a lot of other little problems that happen being in the wheelchair, because, of course, starting out with the cane and the crutches, you put a lot of extra work on the shoulders, and that's something that I'm working with all the time. So I may not have pain in my legs, but I have to deal with the rest of it.
Right.
And as I said, I had worked with somatics, and that is really fantastic because it helps you to determine what area is really out of balance. But if you work with your physicians and your physical therapists, etc., get a chiropractor. I learned quite a bit about my body from chiropractor also. There's so much that is available out there. Some people get a lot of Um, a lot of good support from acupuncturists, holistic doctors. You know, there's just so much, and you're not going to know until you get out there and actually find them. And medical doctors don't always refer to chiropractors, acupuncturists, holistic doctors. So you might have to actually do some of your own research with that.
Right. Great. Thank you. And then just kind of one additional little follow-up question to that. Linda would like to know if you're any treatment physio that you do, physical therapy.
Well, I am in right now physical therapy for my shoulder specifically. So yeah, because I had unfortunately over the last couple of years pulled most of the tendons from my rotator cuffs. So those have not been repaired because my orthopedic doctors will not do surgery on my shoulders because of everything that it means to me to be able to get around. But I am working quite heavily with some physical therapists that I have worked with gosh, over 20 years now. And we work at it, and gosh, it's coming back. I'm getting a lot of use, which with not much pain at all. Not much at all. So it's just, you've got to find doctors and therapists that are going to be able to work with you that you're comfortable with. And that's really your best bet. And if you go to somebody and you don't really like their effect, you don't like what they want you to do, find somebody else who's going to work with you rather than try to make you go beyond yourself, because you can get hurt going beyond what your actual limitations are. Or maybe it'll also work out for you. But my suggestion is just to take it slowly and carefully and work with these people and let them know what's going on with you. Let them know what you feel that you're able to do and not able to do. And at some point, maybe you can work past that. But at least they know going in.
Great. Thank you so much, JoAnn. And I'm really excited for this question towards you, Taylor. It's such a fantastic question. Chris says that he has AMN, and he has a 15-year-old daughter who knows that she's a carrier, but that is all, and he's struggling with how to talk to her. What advice do you have for him to talk to his daughter?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think talking to a teenager, about anything like this is definitely difficult. I know that, as I mentioned, I would talk with my mom about it, but even when I was 13 when she took me to Kennedy Krieger to meet with the doctors, and I remember being kind of like, whatever, like I didn't really want to go. I didn't really want to talk about it because just at that age, you look at the world kind of differently. Honestly, my advice would be, well, first off, it's great that she knows that she's a carrier. I often think that sometimes parents forget, I think, with their teenagers that like the internet exists, and if someone were to look up ALD, they could easily, find out just by doing a quick search that they were a carrier, especially if they're 15, 16, 17, for example. So it's good that that conversation has already been had. But honestly, I would probably approach talking about it with her by, telling her that there are options for having kids, or just taking a more, I think, positive approach rather than being like, you are going to get symptoms and it's going to be really bad, but just showing her positive examples of women like JoAnn who, she may be symptomatic, but as she said at the beginning, like ALD and AMN doesn't define who she is. Like, yeah, this is something that has been thrown at us, but it doesn't have to define our life. But honestly, I would suggest most of all to try to encourage her, if she has like social media accounts, which I'm sure she does, to join Facebook support groups. It was when I was like 15 and 16 that I started joining Facebook support groups for ALD carriers. and 16 when I actually started my own, which you can find with a search on Facebook. It's called YAC, Y-A-C, which is Young ALD Carriers. And I still run that today. So yeah, I made that like 6 years ago. But the reason I created it was because, I was part of these larger groups for ALD carriers, and I felt that I would feel that I didn't know, like, if my worries, like, oh, how do I tell my boyfriend about this? If that was something I would feel comfortable posting in like a larger group, because I felt like everyone had, these way worse issues going on. A lot of them were caregivers of, their sons who had the disease. And I kind of felt like it would be good to have an outlet specifically for young carriers to talk about, issues and stuff that can be more niche to our population. No carriers are excluded from the group. Like, we do have carriers of different ages, but the topics of discussion in that group are definitely geared towards younger women. And I think that it's great for you to talk to her, but I think having an outlet where she can meet other young carriers is so important. Like, once I started doing that, it completely changed my life. Like, even though I could talk about it with my mom, it's just really not the same, like, because she doesn't have ALD and I do. And like, it's just talking to someone who understands, even if they aren't symptomatic yet. Like myself, I don't believe that I'm symptomatic at this point. Just having people your age to talk to and go through it together, that's what I would recommend. So definitely turning to Facebook if she has that, and joining these private groups with other carriers.
Great. And Taylor, I would just like to plug your website one more time, rememberthegirls.org. And just to add that, the having a nonprofit like that, where even if she feels that maybe social media might be a little bit too personal, maybe even just directing her towards the resources that are available, and you can share the websites that I put them into the YouTube chat for you of rememberthegirls.org or odyssey.org, and then to help you remember the Facebook group as well, the YAC, Y-A-C, Young ALD Carriers. So, even just pointing her towards that direction of those resources can help. And that's what the ULF does a lot of as well. We're always here for people that need to talk. And if you want to give us a call, more than likely it'll be myself that answers the phone, and I'm more than happy to talk to you. But what the ULF will do is help point you towards those resources. And then it's really up to you for you to decide what is best for yourself and take it from there.
Yeah, totally. So, adding on to that, yeah, it's when you join these groups, like, you don't have to make any posts yourself. But I think just the benefit of being in them and even seeing that you're part of this larger community, even if you aren't actively posting or asking questions, because, especially I think teenagers are maybe less comfortable with that. And I remember just not wanting my friends to know, really wanting to fit in and feeling like I just didn't want anyone to know. So I think just being part of these groups and seeing other people's posts can definitely have a lot of benefit on its own. Or just joining like a larger group that doesn't just focus on ALD, like our Odyssey, as Keely mentioned, I think is great. So yeah.
Great. And just keeping with some of the comments that are going on the YouTube end, I do just want to plug a couple of initiatives that the ULF will be starting in the fall. We're hoping that in August, we will be able to start having monthly webinars, educational webinars, as well as support group webinars. So we hope to have more sessions like this that will hopefully be a little bit more personal, where we might be able to set it up through Zoom so that we're not having two people on video and then the rest of us are just a voice, or just making typing comments. So please keep an eye out on that if you're interested. Let us know if there's certain topics that you would like us to cover. We will be trying to focus specifically each month on different areas of support to try to keep things within topics so that we can have a specialized conversation on those nights. So please keep an eye on the ULF Facebook page as well as our website for when those get started. As I said, we hope to have those starting in August. Let's see. We do have another question from Jeannie. Do we know how many X-linked carriers are out there? Wondering if we can unite our voices and be in a study to better understand potential progression and treatment.
Yeah, so I'll start with this one. Yeah, my mom just had to bring me my computer charger because it was fully charged and now it's really draining. But yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I don't believe that there are any like statistics out there on how many carriers there are. I don't think it's really something that's ever been recorded. However, with the increase of ALD newborn screening, I think that we're starting to get more of an understanding. But yeah, I mean, I think uniting us, that's something that I've tried to do since I was in high school, and do through Remember the Girls, and, you know, mobilizing studies for the future. Of course, there have been some studies on females with ALD, but we still have a lot of, you know, more questions than answers. So yeah, I definitely am behind that and fully support that. And would love for anyone in this group to, or in this call, to join Remember the Girls. We have a private group on Facebook. And I posted a lot of updates on there about how to get involved in advocacy and other studies. For example, we just started a registry for X-linked carriers, where you just fill out like an online questionnaire about your symptoms and diagnosis history and stuff like that. And then if researchers want to do research on carriers, they can access, request that data. And so that's just a way for us to contribute to research. So just look up Remember the Girls on Facebook, and you'll find our closed Facebook group if you're interested.
Great. And just to keep an eye on the comments, excuse me, I did put a YouTube link yesterday. Dr. Deborah Renaud did present on a study that she is leading with Mayo Clinic. Unfortunately, the study is no longer taking, they were doing a survey-based natural history, so they're no longer taking survey responses. But for those of you that are interested in it, if you want to follow her project, and then should any other projects like that arise, she would probably be the best person to talk to become more involved with those with that project, specifically for men and women with AMN. So if you take a look at the YouTube comments right now, I did put the link to that webinar that she hosted yesterday that gave preliminary statistics regarding the natural history study that she is conducting. So thank you so much. We'll keep going. If you guys are having questions, just feel free to pop them into the chat. I'm keeping an eye on them. And let's see, Joanne, do you want to talk a little bit more about what different types of specialists that you see, and what people can possibly anticipate seeing as their symptoms progress? What kind of specialists should they almost have on speed dial, if you will?
Like I do. Well, let's say I do have different urologists. I have one at KKI. I have one locally here at the University of Rochester, here in New York. He's about, an hour and a half, 2 hours away from me. But I have found that it has been wonderful having a urologist along with the gynecologist, because everything just works together so well. You really need to watch that. And there are so many different medications and testings that can be done. If there starts to be a problem, I know that I have been working with my urologist now for a very long time. Let me take a step back with that. I had a urogynecologist for a little bit over 20 years. And I called to make my annual exam appointment and found out that he had passed away. So I have started with two of his people that he worked closely with. But now I'm seeing a separate urologist and a separate gynecologist, which kind of stinks. But what are you going to do? There's not often a combined profession as that. And unfortunately, I have lost him. But, everybody that I have seen has been pretty wonderful. And I go in and let them know what's going on. Unfortunately, many of the professionals, you also have to give them a history of the disease, not only from your side, but what's going on with the family and all of that. So they have some kind of background. Unfortunately, I had no family history with it. So what they got was what they got. But I was trying to stay up on the latest and greatest news for myself, which also helped when I went to see an orthopedic physician or the urologist, the gynecologist. They all have their own level of being able to assist in your care. And of course, having a terrific primary care doctor who is really willing to work with you. And if you ask to go see a specific specialist and you're able to get their referral, it means all the world at certain times of your life. But it's, there is a lot of things that you have to watch out for. And as I said before, you have to find one that is willing to work with you, because it is pretty involved, and every day can be different. And you just have to be able to get a grasp on that, not only yourself, but also express to the professionals that you're working with that there is an addition that you need to let them know about to your progress, so that they can help you the very best way they know how.
Great. Thank you so much, JoAnn. And coming back to Taylor, getting a little bit personal now, but how do you handle the anxiety of the unknown? I mean, you know a lot, but there is certainly some things that you simply don't know. And how do you deal with the anxiety and just emotions on the side of, will symptoms progress? How will they progress? Any of that sort of worry. Are there any tips on how to handle the anxiety of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I definitely worry about developing symptoms in the future. However, I wouldn't say that I'm scared. I think it's a difference for me, and I think I am really faithful in the fact that there will be more research on females and that we will have more options, as I go into my 30s, 40s, 50s, for example. But coming back to support groups, I really think that is the key to it for me. I do have some other female family members who are carriers as well. I have an older sister who's 10 years older than me, a half sister, and some other cousins. So my sister and I will talk about it every now and then, but I do think that without these support groups, I would be a lot more anxious and fearful. But I also think that another aspect of the anxiety is, sometimes I'll hear female carriers say like that they started getting symptoms when they were in their 20s, they think. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, is me having like restless leg syndrome, is that ALD or is it not? I think that especially, I think for all carriers or a lot of people with, genetic diseases and knowing what the symptoms are, I think it can definitely be anxiety provoking, like noticing everything and wondering if it's related, but having no way of confirming that. People will ask me sometimes like if I have symptoms, and the answer really is I don't know. Like I definitely do have some things like restless legs and pain in my hips and tightness, and I get cramps in my lower legs. And those definitely do overlap with symptoms of AMN, but also I remembered I said I was 21. I actually just turned 22 a few days ago. Whoops. 23rd. Oh my God. But yeah, I mean, I am 22, so I just don't know. They could be related, they could not be, but they don't really affect my quality of life at the moment. But I also think that being involved in these groups and being an advocate has also just taught me a lot of what to look out for. Like, so I know that if, these progress to get worse, I know exactly what steps to take, what appointments to make, who to talk to. And I think that's a lot of power to have, you know, just knowing where to turn if things do get worse. But yeah, I make sure to just take care of my mental health with journaling, taking time for myself, you know, just the basic things that everyone should be doing. But day to day, I don't think that the fear of symptoms really gives me too much anxiety. And I've met so many amazing women in the community who make me feel, they make me feel safe, and they make me just not scared for the future. Like, I don't know, I just feel like I have so many like moms in this community that I've met over the years at conferences, and they just make sure that I'm not scared.
Great. Thank you so much, Taylor. And circling back on a question that was a little bit higher up in the comments that I had skipped over and forgot to go back to. So we're going back to it right now. But there was a question about, are there any tips or resources for applying for disability benefits? And I would just like to pitch in a little bit of a 2 cents, just because this year's conference, we were supposed to have a speaker on disability benefits. So I will just give a little bit of a resource for that. But then JoAnn, I'm not sure if you have applied or if you have any knowledge of the disability system in New York where you live.
I do.
Okay, so just to begin, I would like to say, you know, we did have a lawyer in Illinois that was going to speak with us this year at the Chicago conference, that was going to give tips on how best to put your best foot forward in terms of applying for disability benefits. And a part of it really does depend on what state you're in. So I guess the ULF's recommendation on resources for applying for disability benefits would be to research if you have any lawyers in your area that specialize in disability law, and reach out to them and explain the situation of what questions you have, and see if they're able to offer you any assistance in that realm. And they would be able to assist you with what specific state you're in and give you the best direction. So with that, I will pass it on to JoAnn.
Yeah. Well, I had compiled all of the test results, x-rays, etc., into a specific file, and took it with me when I went to see the Social Security office. And what I did was I went in, I said, hey, I'm just here to find out some information about, you know, in the event that I want to actually apply for Social Security disability. And I sat down and I gave the woman the information that I had, gave her the diagnosis and all of that. I did not go into any of the additional symptoms. I didn't say, oh, I'm depressed, oh, I've got this, oh, I've got that, which were just symptoms because of, or could be symptoms because of the ALD. I just went in with all of my medical background, and I thought I was just, you know, a fact-finding mission, because I really hadn't thought that I needed to be on disability yet. But while we were going through it, she was actually applying for me. She felt that I definitely had a lot of reason to file for the disability, and I just went in with the facts and didn't try to elaborate on a lot of different things, you know. So what I dealt with was just bringing her the fact that I had AMN. And at that time, they had just included the ALD AMN diagnosis in with the multiple sclerosis diagnosis. So it is something that they definitely have something to look at and say, oh yeah, it's in here. And but as I said, it's not going to do you a lot of good to go in with a lot of the secondary type of diagnoses and complaints that you could give them, because what you're going for is a disability because of the ALD AMN, and it's best just to approach them with names and addresses and phone numbers of doctors and copies of the tests that have been done that prove that you have the disease, and take it from there. I didn't have to fight for it. The funny thing is I went on vacation shortly after I went in to speak with them, and when I got home from vacation, I had a check, and I was shocked, and I refused to cash it until I found out whether or not it was true. And so I called and did a little bit of research with that, and they said, yes, you have been approved for disability, which has come into play, that I've been really, really grateful for ever since. So it's, you just have to go in and be as open and honest with as much background information that you can take with you. And just go with, hey, I've been diagnosed as a carrier of ALD, and as an adult, I have AMN. And I just want to let you know that it's there, and these are the reasons, these are the test results and the doctors that I've talked to, and that worked for me. And I think it's worked for a few other people that I've spoken with about it, because you're approaching them, with what you actually have been diagnosed with, and whatever tests and names and numbers you can give them from there will only help. And you're going to end up getting some questionnaires, and just take your time and fill them out and send them back in, and it's just going to help to support what you approach them with.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much, Joanne. All right, coming back to Taylor, we have a question for you from Jeannie. With you knowing you're a carrier at such a young age, did you experience any stigma growing up?
So I don't think that I faced much stigma from my friends or peers. I think growing up, my friends always knew, like, I had this weird thing that they knew my dad died of, and that I was a carrier of the disease. As I mentioned, I think still a lot of my friends don't really fully understand what that means for me. However, none of them have ever been judgmental or anything of that nature. I think most of the stigma, honestly, has just surrounded my carrier status itself. So what I mean by that is I'll be talking to someone about the disease and say that, it's an X-linked disease, so I'm a carrier of it. And then people respond like, oh, you're just a carrier, like that, like, good for you. Or like, oh, like I'm just a carrier, and just a carrier, like just a carrier. I've heard that so many times. And I think there's just such a major misconception of what being a carrier means. I mean, even, if you look at the news and see that, carrier is usually assigned with someone who is asymptomatic, who carries a disease, like lately has, been in the news more with the pandemic. That word itself is just attached to this idea of being asymptomatic and not being affected. And I think the ALD community is definitely moving away from the use of the word carrier just because of that connotation that it has. However, I guess I don't exactly know what to consider myself, just because I almost feel it wrong of me to say, like, I'm a woman with ALD if I don't have symptoms. So I don't know. It's kind of a gray area, but I think we need to fully get rid of the, oh, you're just a carrier thing. We need to get that completely out of people's minds, because as we've talked about, there are a lot of issues and difficulties that can come with being a female with this disease, whether that be physical symptoms, which can be severe, the difficulties with reproduction, and also fear, worry, isolation. And on top of that, the fact that many carriers and females with ALD are also caregivers, and they're wearing many different hats. So that's what I would say on the stigma side of things.
Perfect. And then one thing I did want to point out to the people watching on YouTube, I did put Taylor's Remember the Girls Facebook group. There is a link in the comments there. So if you find that, if you can't happen to find it, feel free to shoot us an email at office@ulf.org. I'd be happy to point you in that direction. And we've got about 5 minutes left in the panel. So if anybody has any last lingering questions that they want to chip in, I do have one more to ask. This is really for both of you. It was directed specifically to Taylor, but JoAnn, I feel like you'll be able to assist as well. Taylor, with you being younger, are you having any issues with insurance coverage, either health insurance, or if you've gone to apply for life insurance, or are there any concerns with having a carrier status and applying for insurance?
So as of now, no. I've been told that my carrier or a carrier status or any genetic information, there's like the GINA Act, I believe it's called, which makes sure that people can't be discriminated against based on genetic information. So no, I've never had any issues as of now. I also don't have life insurance, but health insurance, no, I've never had any issues, thankfully.
Okay. JoAnn, do you have anything to add on the insurance side?
We have been very, very well taken care of with my husband's policies from work. We're both now on Medicare. After you go on disability, Social Security disability, after 2 years, they automatically put you onto Medicare. So, it's something that it just rolls into it. And then my husband's insurance became secondary. And I have not had to apply for that much. And this may just be, something that I have to work on. We did finally put a wheelchair into Medicare. And there's other things that we have looked at and tried to have covered by the different insurances. And might be a good idea to think about getting a medical advocate. I don't know that much about them or how prevalent they are in the different areas, but it's definitely something that I've thought about because I know that there's going to be things that I need to help me just do day-to-day business, and but I need some help with that to find out, who do you go to and who do you argue with, who do you give your information to prior to being really able to be supported in the best way. So there is so much that can be achieved. I just haven't had the time or the reason to look into a lot of things. But so far, my insurances are pretty darn good about keeping up with everything that I have needed so far.
All right. Well, we're coming down to the end of our hour. I would just like to take one more opportunity to thank Taylor and JoAnn so much for being with us today. I'm so sorry that we couldn't be together in person, but hopefully we will be next year. And thank you to everybody on the YouTube side that has participated and shared a little bit of their story and asked such wonderful questions. And like I said, hopefully in August and the months following, we will have more of these monthly webinars where we can start meeting on a little bit more regular basis. Mm-hmm. And with any luck, we'll all be together next year in Chicago. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you.
You too.